did you get involved with the Wetterling case, and how long have you been involved?
Okay, I got involved in the Wetterling case through Dwayne Hart, working on his case. He was arrested by the FBI and denoted as a person of interest in the abduction of Wetterling. And I interviewed Dwayne over a period of about 60 hours, actually a little more than 60 hours. And during that period of interviewing Dwayne, he supplied me with names of individuals that he thought could be involved in the Wetterling case, Daniel Heinrich being one of them. And so, as such, after Dwayne pled guilty to, I believe it was 8 counts of child molestation, he was sent to Lina Lakes to serve his time, and he was subsequently released and now is under civil commitment for a predatory sex offense or offender. But after this period of about 5 years, I was contacted by Diane Millenbauer and Robin Bratch. They knew I had worked on the on Dwayne Hart's case, which was associated with the Wetterling situation. And they asked if I would be agreeable to meet with them, and along with Patty Wetterling up in St. Joseph, Minnesota, where Jacob was abducted from. And that's how I became involved in. They had an individual by the name of Luke Coles, who had, he was a homosexual, and he was residing with his boyfriend, Dennis Shiles, and that is in the same area where the Wetterlings lived. And Coles believed that Shiles may be involved in Jacob's disappearance. So I subsequently met with them and heard what Coles alleged was his evidence or his beliefs. And I wasn't, while I was familiar with the case, I didn't have any inroads into what actual evidentiary data and or items that they had. And so I had requested from Patty Wetterling, after listening to him, that I knew 2 investigators, both retired, one from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which was Dennis Sigfuth, and the other one was the chief of Stearns County Detectives, Lou Leland. Now, Lou resigned in a week and a half or 2 weeks after Jacob's disappearance. He'd been out on an elk hunting trip out west, and Sheriff Graff had the authorities out there get a hold of him and tell him an airplane was coming out to pick him up. And subsequently, he was picked up, flown back here to St. Cloud, and being chief of detectives, he reverted to about 3rd ring on the pecking order. First was the FBI, then the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehensions, then the Sheriff's Department. And they took Lou, and this is probably one of the best profilers I'd ever worked with or met. And they ended up putting him in the basement, preparing what they called AB lists of possible suspects, probables and possibles. And Lou took that for several days and then went up and resigned from the Sheriff's Department. That trip cost him $4,200. It was non-reimbursable. The county wasn't going to pay him for it. And then they needed him back here so bad they put him in the basement, and that torqued him. And Lou subsequently came to work for my firm for three and a half years. And then he moved to Deming, New Mexico. And Dennis Sigafus, who was a retired BCA agent, had initially worked on the Wetterling case prior to his retirement. And I offered up both those individuals to Patty Wetterling that I would like to get them to come up. And they had inside information in the case and knowledge of evidentiary things that could either just support or dissuade what Coles was telling us. And at that time, Patty asked that I not contact anyone until she got approval from the sheriff's department for them, one or both, to come in, because she didn't want the reputation of the foundation tarnished in any way or frowned upon by the sheriff's department.
Now,
But
what do you make of that? Putting the foundation in front of actually finding her son. Hold on, let me get some water here.
Well, I wrote in a memo to the file that I found that to be extremely, how should I say it, disturbing. And by that I mean, to me, if my son was missing, there were two individuals that had knowledge of the case that could come up and either verify or shun the evidence that Coles was putting out about Childs. If my son missing, there's no way in hell that I would have contacted anyone. If they were willing to come up, I'd say, get them up here. However, it was not quite a week later that Patty, after talking with the sheriff's department, she had me contact Dennis Sigafus, and he agreed to fly up and meet with us and go over the information that we had to put any emphasis or validity on any of the things, that Coles was conveying to us about Childs. And Dennis came up and we worked in the case for about 3.5 weeks. And this was all pro bono. There was no money involved. The only money that transpired was absorbed by Northwest Airlines in flying Sigafus up here. But at any rate, we weren't able to put any credibility to what Coles was telling us. And we reached the conclusion that he was trying to use this case as a means to get his lover back. His lover tied in with a couple other guys, Richard Ronstadt and Les Carsgrove. They were out of the Minneapolis area, and Childs was at that time living with Cosgrove and Ronstadt over in Milltown, Wisconsin. And during our investigation, we subsequently found that there was a child pornography ring involved, and Childs and Coles were both a part of it. And so we went and took all our reports and all our evidence down to the Stearns County Sheriff's Department. And the minute we entered the sheriff's office down there, it was made very blunt and clear to us they didn't want to hear one word out of my effing mouth as to who might have done this or who did it. And what we were doing was just furnishing them with what we had accomplished. And that was it. We weren't down there to tell him anybody's name, but we did include, and Sigafus conveyed to Sheriff Graff that, or no, excuse me, at that time it was Castreba. Sheriff Castreba, as Graff had retired, about the child pornography. And after he was grossly mistreated, totally unprofessionally by the sheriff's department, and I, in turn, was told with expletives what I could do with the information. Sigafus then contacted Assistant County Attorney Mary Yonkers and conveyed to her that we had a large volume of reports and we would like her to, if she wanted to have them. And she told Sigafus, yes, have Peart bring them over, which I did the following day. And upon entering her office, I got the same treatment that I got from the sheriff's office, that they didn't want, or she didn't want any of her investigators trashed, and she used other verbiage as to what I could do with the reports, etc.
Now, but what, as an investigator, what do you make of law enforcement? Well, first off, they made it sound like they were tracking down every lead, and then you have someone like yourself and Diane coming in with information. What do you make of that?
Ego, strictly ego. The subsequent individuals that we brought forward, other than Coles, to them, neither one of them, well, let me put it this way. One was 2 fries short of a Happy Meal, and the other was about a half dozen fries short. And they didn't want to even begin to think that these guys could put it over their learned minds for all these years. They were dummies, according to them.
Do you believe that there has been a strategic cover-up of or protection of the individuals that might be involved?
Yes, to put it bluntly, because they had preconceived ideas who was involved, one of them being Mr. Rassier, excuse me. And that's what a Detective Charlie Olson inferred to me when we brought our first reports in on Child, that he knew who did it and they were going to get him, and there was no car involved. Well, that only leaves one person, and that's where Razier lived, in the grove. You went through that grove on their driveway to their home. And again, I'm not here to complain or dissuade or defame anybody. What I'm trying to do is say, look at the evidence. And I can go into a litany on that as an investigator. I've been involved in investigating 53 homicides over the years. And I would never approach a case the way these individuals had approached it. Up until a month ago, I had never been talked to. I'd been talked at by law enforcement, but never to. And that was when FBI agent Chris Boulder stopped by my office. And why? We had evidence, we had statements, we had tapes, we had written communications from prisoners that had been involved with Richard Boehner, who he told while they're in prison, could be prison bravado, I don't know. but they would never get him on the Wetterling case, you know. And it escapes me totally, wholly, and completely why no one ever talked to me. Well, one deputy did, and that was Dan New. He's retired now. But I believe it was July 27th or 22nd, 1997. You've heard it as the infamous confession tape.
It was July 7th.
Or July 7th, excuse me. I don't have any of my notes here, so. But I had received a call from Diane. I had talked with Michael before. I had interviewed him. I felt he had credible knowledge and evidence and was carrying a heavy guilt burden over this situation. And I'd also talked to Richard Boehner, his brother, and to Brenda Boehner, which was their sister. Now, Brenda lived just about 7 minutes from the abduction site in Wade Park at the, I believe it's Sunrise Apartment.
Sundial Apartment.
Or Sundial Apartments. And she alleged that Richard and Michael brought Jacob there and had him in a sleeping bag because he was scared of his father and this type thing. And her ex-husband, which I ultimately found out, was also a child pornographer, and he was living at that time up in Duluth. And social services had taken the kids away from her as an unfit mother. And I never did, or she never did explain how they found her to be unfit. But she gave us information relative to where Jacob was taken that night. She also alluded to the fact that when the sheriff's or FBI or some investigator came to ask her about Richard, she told them a lie. She said, well, he was down at my grandmother's in Paynesville. And they never came back to follow up on that.
She lied because she was scared.
Yeah. And again, why weren't they followed up on? You prepare the AB list. This guy is a sexual predator that had forcefully committed sodomy, both oral and anal, on a 7-year-old boy. Well, they were living in Clearwater, and the boy was from Buffalo, down Wright County. He was also convicted of molesting his brother Michael. And the family history is the dad was imprisoned for incestual conduct, the older brother Alan for the same thing, Richard on the child, or the 7-year-old, and on his brother Michael. And Michael was state's evidence, turned state's evidence to put Richard away. Now, again, when Detective Noner, all this stuff was brought to his attention, he said he didn't find Michael credible. You could find him credible enough to send a guy to prison. But with this information, he's not credible. Sheriff Kostreba's nephew wrote to Diane Muehlbauer to advise her that he was in prison with Richard Boehner.
They called me.
Yeah, and also called her and told her about Richard's bravado in prison. And I believe my memory serves me. Again, I don't have my notes, man, I'm sorry. But there were 3 individuals that supported what Richard was saying to them in prison. But ultimately, all this stuff was discarded or ignored or put under the rug or lost. we don't know. But on this one occasion of July 7th, when I received a call from Diane that Michael and his sister Brenda were going to come to her house and discuss the case, then she asked if I could come up and clandestinely record or covertly record them. I had a problem. We were doing a case for Meeker County on a strip bar in Cedar Mills, Minnesota. And I don't know what happened, but we fried my transmitting and recording devices, and I had sent them to California. So I had nothing that I could use that would be viable and could cover a period of who knows how long. So I then contacted the Candioi County Sheriff's Office and talked to a deputy, Newman, Todd Newman, who was with the C6 Drug Task Force, and explained to him the situation, and I asked if I could borrow their equipment. He in turn then got a hold of his commander, the drug force commander, and told him what was going on and asked if he could loan the equipment to me. And that individual that was task force commander was Joe Pohl. And Joe advised him that it was their equipment. He didn't want outsiders using it, but yet he, Newman, had to be there while it was in use so that nothing would happen to it. And he and I were upstairs in Diane and Joe's bedroom, and their equipment consists of a pager device that was their transmitter. And again, wirelessly, we recorded the conversation upstairs. And as such, Michael made admissions that Detective, or well, at that time, Agent Newman, in his words, presumed it to be a confession tape and that it should be gotten as quickly as possible to an experienced investigator, interrogator with the Stearns County Sheriff's Department. But prior to meeting with Diane at her house, I arranged with her that I could talk with Michael and have Newman with me by reporting him to them, and she could tell him prior to our arrival that I was up there working on a workers' comp insurance case, and we'd been surveilling some people in St. Cloud, and I would have one of my investigators with. Well, I had the only recording device I had with me was a small cassette recorder. And we met them at Perkins. They'd been there about 15 minutes before we got there. And Michael and Brenda both knew me. They were completely at ease with me. They didn't know Newman, but presumed he was what we told him he was, just investigating a workers' comp case. And I started talking to Michael about the case itself, the Wetterling case. And Michael again described what had happened at that location, who was there, etc. He described the gun as a silver handgun with black grips. He also talked about a knife being used. And to my knowledge, there was never anything in the press or released to the public about the color of the gun, but he described it as a silver revolver with black grips. And after talking with him, and he demonstrated, both Newman and I and Diane, how he alleged that Luke Coles had grabbed Jacob and how he controlled him and got into the car. Now, what's really funny, if we go to the night of that kidnapping, Jacob Wetterling, Trevor, and Aaron, his buddy, Trevor being his younger brother, called, got permission ostensibly from Jerry Wetterling. Patty denied him to go up to the store, but Jerry agreed because Jacob had been feeling kind of remorseful about a hockey game or a basketball game or whatever he was involved with that day and not playing well. And he thought a movie would cheer them up. Now I'm reiterating what was put into the papers as to why he agreed to let them go. But anyway, they get up and take off. 2 bicycles and a scooter. Okay? The youngest was on the scooter. Now, Heinrich alleges in his confession to the judge that he's on a dead-end gravel road. Question, how the hell do he know it was a dead-end gravel road? And what pedophile goes out at 9 o'clock at night on a dead-end gravel road to abduct kids? But he goes and says he passes them on the road. One was wearing reflective vests, they had flashlights, and they were all on bicycle. They weren't. Even Heinrich, not being, a high IQ type individual, should know the difference between a bicycle and a scooter. Okay? But then he says he pulls up in this driveway and turns around and faces the direction they were going. And he waits 20, 25 minutes for them to come back. And then he accosts him. He gets out, puts on a mask, takes his gun, goes down, and hits the kid. What Heinrich's modus operandi, so to speak, in previous cases was he would take them the minute he saw them. How did he know they were coming back, that they lived down there? They could have been visiting, going back into St. Joseph, right? The other thing that really bothers me with it is in his confession, he says that after he takes Jacob, handcuffs him, places him in the front seat of the car and has him bend down, he goes out the gravel dead-end road to Highway 75, which is a county road, and he turns left on that, okay? All the while he's doing this, he's listening on the scanner, and there's all this talk about this abduction. There wasn't, okay? But the primary thing is that when Trevor and Aaron got back to Jacob's house, the babysitter had, after they told her, she called her dad. Her dad come over, questioned the boys, called the Wetterlings, and then called the sheriff's department. So you have a 15, 20-minute lapse in time there. But the judge bought what he was saying. But anyway, he said he went up towards Albany and then cut back, came out at Roseau on the Highway 23, and then went down to Paynesville. And again, the Boehner brothers' grandmother lived there, and they'd previously lived in Paynesville. So they would know each other. Okay. all these people network and share and this type of thing. Okay. But he says that he pulls up into this area by the sewage ponds. And he has Jacob get out of the car and undress. And then they move over towards this grove of trees. And the judge asked him, "What did you do to Jacob?" "Nothing." "Nothing?" "No, we both masturbated. That was it." And then Jacob said, "I'm cold." So I tell him, "Well, put your clothes on." Jacob says, "Will you take me home?" He says, "No, there's too many towns between here and there." And then he tells Jacob, "Turn around, I've got to urinate." Now, give me a break. You two are standing here facing each other, masturbating. And to urinate, he has to turn his back. Jacob turns his back. About that time, a police car goes by on Highway 23, and this area wasn't that far off 23. No siren, but it had his lights on, was headed north. And that's when Heinrich said, "I got a problem here. I'm going to have to get rid of my witness." Okay? Now, Heinrich at the scene had put on a mask. Other cases like Jared, the kid from Cold Springs that he abducted, molested, and then just kept his pants and underwear, he let him go after he put his snowmobile suit on, right? He just told him get out of the car and go home. Wasn't wearing a mask. Now, why would you wear a mask if you're 35 miles from home? You're in an area nobody knows you. Okay? Right. But he says now he's fearful that the squad car is going by. He doesn't want to be seen or heard doing anything. But then he takes his handgun, loads 2 rounds in it, and then Jacob's still got his back to him, walks up, points at the back of Jacob's head, pulls the trigger, click. Well, number one, Jacob would hear the cylinder being shut. Probably metallic sound of putting 2 rounds in it. Then he hears a click. What would you do as an 11-year-old? Would you stand there and not look back? Or would you take off like hell bent for leather? But then click, nothing. So then he shoots. And he said, Jacob's still standing. And he's but 3 feet behind him. And Jacob's still standing. So he shoots him again and he goes down. Well, then he says he drags him about 100 yards, throws some brush and grass on him to hide him, and drives back to his apartment, leaving the body later. Okay? Then what's really wild is he walks back a couple hours later with a trenching tool or a small shovel and says, this isn't going to work, but there's a bobcat over at this construction site or a Geel front end loader, I don't know which. But he tells the judge, I know where they keep the key. Neither the prosecutor or the judge said, how do you know that? But then he gets in and starts it up. Now this guy doesn't want to be seen. Turns on the headlights and drives. I don't know, maybe a quarter of a mile. And he's got the headlights on while he's burying this kid with a front end loader. He gets all done. He's going to return the front end loader, and he realizes Jacob's shoes are still lying on the ground there. So he picks them up, goes down the road, About 100 yards, he throws them into a ravine. Okay, and then he parks the bobcat in that where he had found it. Apparently, never said anything about the keys, but apparently returned the keys. Now you got a guy shooting off a gun in the edge of town at 10 o'clock or so at night. You got him stealing a bobcat, driving it, with the headlights on, but you don't want to be seen. You don't want any attention brought to you. So he gets there. And after he gets back to his apartment, he just goes to sleep. He doesn't take anything. All his previous thing, he's either with a knife cut off some hair. And again, that goes back to what Michael Boehner said. There was a knife and a gun. But he cuts off a lock of this kid's hair, takes another one's pants and underwear, takes another one's stocking cap. They always want a souvenir that they can ultimately masturbate over when things aren't too active for them. Okay, so he goes through all that, but he doesn't take a thing of Jacob's with him. It doesn't make sense, all right? But then a year later, he doesn't drive back to the scene. He walks back to the scene again with a small